It was to be another lively, vibrant night in Paris. The city pulsing with its iconic energy. Cafes overflowed with laughter, the gentle tap of glasses, and the hum of conversations filling the cool air. The Eiffel Tower stood tall, its lights cutting through the dark like a beacon. Couples wandered the streets, lost in their own worlds, unaware of the storm quietly brewing just beyond the horizon. And then, without warning, the calm was shattered. At 9:16 p.m. on the night of November 13th, 2015, a deafening explosion ripped through the air outside the Stade de France, the country's national sports stadium, as thousands of fans gathered for a soccer match between France and Germany. Inside, the French president, François Hollande, sat watching, but was then evacuated shortly thereafter by his heavily armed security detail. Minutes later, the stillness of Paris was ripped apart by a hail of gunfire as armed men stormed the vibrant 10th and 11th arrondissements, two of France's 20 administrative districts. Cafes and restaurants became slaughterhouses, with automatic fire ripping through crowds of unsuspecting diners. Within minutes, dozens of innocent lives were brutally taken. Then came the bloodshed at the Bataclan concert hall. For more than 2 harrowing hours, terror gripped the crowd as the attackers methodically hunted innocent people, executing 89 souls in cold blood in a place meant for music, joy, and celebration. By dawn, the death toll had climbed to 130, with more than 400 wounded. It was Paris's darkest night since the horrors of World War II, and it was the work of ISIS. Welcome to Threat Level Red. I'm your host, Charles Denyer, and this is episode 10, Blood and Terror, Inside ISIS and the Deadly Jihad Assault on Europe.
Welcome to Threat Level Red, a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. Every week, Charles brings his real-world expertise to the front lines of America's most pressing threats. Cyber attacks, extremist networks, rogue states, terrorism, economic instability, systemic breakdowns, and so much more. From the digital battleground to the streets of America, no threat is left uncovered. No spin, no filters, just intel.
The Paris attacks were no random act of madness. It was a cold, calculated, military-style massacre orchestrated by ISIS commanders far from French soil, but carried out by European citizens turned killers, and designed to rip fear straight into the heart of the West. How did this nightmare come to Europe? And how did an extremist ideology manage to penetrate the streets of one of the world's most vibrant cities and leave such devastation in its wake? Stay with us, the story is just beginning. So who and what exactly is ISIS? Because this is where we have to start in trying to understand the horrific atrocities that unfolded in Paris on that deadly Friday night. It's a common question, but with complex answers, so let's dive in. The Islamic State, more commonly known as ISIS or ISIL, is a transnational jihadist militant organization that initially rose to prominence in the early 2000s. The group declared itself a caliphate in 2014, which essentially means claiming religious and political authority over all Muslims worldwide, an assertion that was widely rejected by the global Muslim community. At its height, the Islamic State controlled vast territories across Iraq and Syria, with a population of about 12 million people under its rule by the end of 2015. The group operated with an annual budget exceeding $1 billion and commanding over 30,000 ruthless fighters. Under its brutal rule, the organization became infamous for its extreme violence, including genocidal attacks against various ethnic groups, as well as widespread persecution of Christians, Shia Muslims, and other minority groups. And the group also conducted public executions, often filming the beheadings of soldiers, journalists, and aid workers, along with destroying numerous cultural and religious sites in its destructive path. Their atrocities were not confined to their territories, as the Islamic State carried out terrorist attacks across the globe, including the November 2015 Paris attacks and countless other acts of brutality. The origins of the Islamic State trace back to a group founded by Abu Omar al-Baghdadi in 2004, and they eventually merged with Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Though Baghdadi was killed in 2010 in a joint U.S.-Iraqi forces raid on a safe house, the Islamic State continued to grow. Over the years, it changed names and grew more radical, eventually becoming ISIL and again before declaring itself a global caliphate in 2014 under the leadership of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. This announcement marked the beginning of its most violent and expansive phase. And at this time, the world came to recognize this brutal group simply as ISIS. Now they had a caliphate, land, power, and global attention. But how did ISIS take the long, dark road from the streets of Syria and Iraq to strike at the very heart of Europe with chilling precision? That's next, so stay with us. The Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, was an absolute tinderbox waiting to explode. What started as protests against the brutal regime of President Bashar al-Assad quickly spiraled into a catastrophic conflict, drawing in not only Syrians, but foreign fighters from across the globe, and especially from Europe. And for many young European Muslims, especially those living in marginalized neighborhoods marked by poverty, social exclusion, and discrimination,
we are spat on wherever we go. We are Muslims, yes, but also French citizens. But we are treated like animals by the elites of this country.
Syria was more than just a faraway war zone. It was a beacon of purpose, a chance to escape alienation, and tragically, a recruiting ground for one of the deadliest terror organizations the world has ever seen, ISIS. And thousands answered the call. From the slums of Paris to the gritty outskirts of Berlin, London's East End, and countless other impoverished European neighborhoods, young Muslim men and women packed their bags and journeyed to Syria. Many came from disenfranchised communities, vulnerable to the onslaught of ISIS propaganda, which promised the creation of a utopian caliphate where brotherhood, justice, and religious purity reigned supreme. This vision was sold relentlessly through videos, social media campaigns, and charismatic recruiters who tapped into feelings of alienation and injustice felt by many European Muslims. The very alienation felt by these young Muslims in European cities, living in the shadows of economic inequality, discrimination, and cultural exclusion, created fertile ground for ISIS to plant its seeds of hate. The group preyed on their fears, offering an escape, a path to power, and a way to exact revenge against a world that had failed them. Once inside ISIS-controlled territory, these recruits underwent intense military and ideological training, such as learning to handle firearms, construct explosives, and conduct coordinated assaults. But beyond the tactical training, they were steeped in extreme ideology that demonized the West as a justifiable enemy of the Muslim world, sanctioning violence as a religious duty. For many, the brutality they witnessed firsthand became a turning point, solidifying their resolve and severing any connections to their past lives back in Europe. From 2013 onward, as ISIS carved out a brutal caliphate spanning large parts of Syria and Iraq, its propaganda machine glamorized territorial conquests and atrocities alike. The group's media outreach was unmatched, with videos of executions and battlefield victories streaming worldwide. But by 2016, international coalition forces had begun pushing back, systematically dismantling ISIS's territorial hold. The caliphate began to crumble, but the human damage was done. Thousands of battle-hardened militants, many European-born, faced defeat and exile. Returning home, they brought with them not only combat skills, but a radical ideology and a network of contacts. this return flow became a nightmare for European intelligence agencies. Unlike the traditional lone wolf attackers of the past, these returnees were trained operatives capable of executing highly complex, coordinated terror attacks. And the European borders, they proved difficult to monitor effectively. A large number of these fighters re-entered quietly, slipping through porous checkpoints or claiming refugee status amid the continent's ongoing humanitarian crisis. Moreover, Europe's liberal immigration and asylum laws, designed to protect the vulnerable, inadvertently created vulnerabilities exploited by those returning as extremists. Once home, many reconnected with disenfranchised communities, acting as recruiters and radicalizers themselves. The result was a chilling escalation in terror attacks across Europe, beginning with smaller, less coordinated assaults and culminating in devastating mass casualty events, such as the Paris attacks in 2015. This was followed by dozens of other attacks in Brussels, Manchester, Berlin, and countless other cities, all illustrating how the Syrians' conflict reach had become an intimate threat on European soil. But it wasn't just about physical attacks, as these returnees spread radical ideology within their communities, deepening divides and creating cycles of recruitment. Mosques, social media, and local networks became echo chambers for extremist thought, further destabilizing an already fragile social fabric. The very situation exposed uncomfortable truths about Europe's integration policies, social inequalities, and the challenge of balancing security with civil liberties. Alienation, discrimination, and a real and growing identity crisis among European Muslim youth made them vulnerable to ISIS's narrative, fueling a self-reinforcing cycle of radicalization and violence. The transnational jihadist threat forced Europe to confront not only terrorism, but also deep social fractures. And all of this set the stage for one of the darkest nights in recent European history, the November 13th, 2015 Paris attacks, a moment that shocked the world and revealed the terrifying new face of terror. Stay with us as we return to that deadly night in Paris. A crisp, mild evening settles over Paris as cafes spill over with laughter and wine. The streets shimmer beneath warm lamplight. At the Stade de France, the crowd roars, the energy of a football match between France and Germany humming through the night's air. The city of light is alive, unaware that in moments it will plunge into carnage and darkness. Then, 9:16 p.m., a jarring explosion, one of three at the stadium, rips through the calm outside the Stade de France. But this was only the beginning. The first shots rang out just after 9:25 p.m. on two bustling streets near the Canal Saint-Martin in Paris's 10th arrondissement. Three Belgian-Moroccan attackers emerged from a rented car and without hesitation killed the driver of a nearby vehicle before opening fire on people gathered outside a busy cafe and bar. They then crossed the street, shooting into a nearby restaurant where diners sat unsuspectingly, all while one of the attackers shouts in Arabic as the chaos erupted. In total, 13 people were killed in these initial strikes, with 10 more critically wounded. By 9:32 p.m., the attackers had moved on, arriving at another crowded cafe near a restaurant terrace on a nearby street. Again, they shouted in Arabic, "God is great," and fired into the crowd of innocent patrons, killing 5 and injuring 8. Witnesses described the gunmen firing in rapid bursts before retreating once more into their getaway vehicle. Minutes later, at 9:36, they struck again at a restaurant in the 11th arrondissement. For several minutes, the gunmen sprayed bullets across the outdoor terrace, killing 21 people and leaving 7 critically injured. Many victims were simply sitting outside, enjoying their evening, when the attack tore through the crowd. At 9:40 p.m., one attacker then dropped off another at a cafe not far away. Calm and composed, he sat quietly, placed an order, and even smiled and apologized to patrons for the interruption. Then, he detonated an explosive vest, killing himself and injuring 15 others, one seriously. And then the attack on the Bataclan. The American rock band Eagles of Death Metal were playing to a crowd of about 1,500 people. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, escape, and sound. But lurking in the shadows, 3 gunmen waited in a black rental car. Dressed in dark clothing, armed with assault rifles, and fueled by a deadly resolve, the French nationals of Algerian descent were ready to bring terror to life with a relentless barrage of bullets, targeting the innocent and unsuspecting. As the band launched into the song Kiss the Devil, the gunmen struck. First, they opened fire outside, killing 3. Then, they stormed inside the packed concert hall. The initial gunshots were mistaken for fireworks by the crowd, until the screams began. Gunfire tore through the audience, mowing down rows of people, plunging the concert into darkness, lit only by muzzle flashes as the attackers fired into balconies and stalls. Survivors described bodies piled atop one another, pools of blood, and the desperate scramble for escape. Some hid in backstage rooms. Others climbed into the rafters. Those who played dead were aggressively kicked and shot if they showed signs of life. The attackers worked with brutal efficiency, reloading their weapons time and time again. 2 moved upstairs to the balconies. 1 stayed below, shooting fleeing victims and laughing, according to witnesses. When some tried to flee through emergency exits, they were shot dead. At 10:15, the police finally arrived. First, the Search and Intervention Brigade, then the highly elite raid unit. Officers entering the theater confronted one of the gunmen, who was preparing to execute a survivor. However, he detonated his explosive vest, killing himself. Then 2 other gunmen took approximately 20 hostages, forcing them into a back room and seizing their phones. They demanded France withdraw from Muslim lands, threatening to kill hostages if their demands weren't met. After tense negotiations, the police launched an assault just after midnight. During the 3-minute operation, one of the gunmen detonated his vest, while the other was shot and killed as he tried to flee. While all of the hostages were rescued, the death toll climbed to 89 innocent lives, with hundreds more wounded. The Bataclan attack was a horrific chapter in Europe's fight against terrorism, a chilling reminder of the human cost when terror strikes at the heart of a city. And this was no random chaos. It was meticulous, highly coordinated violence as 3 heavily armed teams carried out 6 simultaneous attacks throughout Paris, leaving 130 people dead. France responded quickly, declaring a state of emergency, with 7 attackers killed that very night and 2 more eliminated in a raid 5 days later. An aggressive roundup of suspected terrorists also took place in the days, weeks, and months after the attacks, resulting in more arrests and convictions. Yet, the physical and emotional scars ran far deeper, leaving wounds that some say may never heal. In that moment, France and much of Europe underwent a shift. Their ideologies began to change, and attitudes toward immigration and integration grew more rigid, fueled by a newfound resolve. That's next, so stay with us. In the wake of the Paris attacks, the political landscape of Europe fractured along fault lines of fear and identity. Suddenly, Muslims were cast in a new light, not as citizens, but as potential threats. Policies once cherished, liberal asylum, open borders, multiculturalism, they all became suspect. Surveys show that across Europe, mainstream parties began tapping into anti-Muslim rhetoric. In Poland, the ruling Law and Justice Party linked refugees to terrorism, using suspect data to justify rejecting asylum seekers. In Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel's earlier refugee welcome now morphed into stricter border controls after violent incidents and the rise of far-right political parties in Germany. And Islamophobia didn't stay fringe. It wove itself into everyday politics. Far-right groups all throughout Europe gained mainstream traction, pulling politicians toward anti-immigrant populism. And opinion polls revealed a chilling acceptance, even from liberal-minded, centrist-thinking European citizens. And it wasn't just words. In Muslim communities in Germany and the UK, they experienced sharp increases in hate crimes, with violent Islamophobic incidents doubling in Germany, tripling in the UK, all after the terrorist attack in Paris. Meanwhile, conservative figures blamed immigrants wholesale. Hungary's prime minister called refugees Muslim invaders. And Italy, Greece, and others followed suit with draconian measures, employing migrant removal as a security strategy.
All the values Europe stands for, freedom, democracy, human rights, are incompatible with Islam.
But do these moves pose a moral paradox? And can responding to terrorism by targeting entire communities actually alienate them further and stoke radicalization? Stay with us, don't go anywhere. And now back to the story one last time. The so-called caliphate, once sprawling across vast swaths of Iraq and Syria, is largely gone. The brutal territorial reign of ISIS has collapsed, and its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was killed by the United States in 2019. However, has the threat truly been contained? Well, the answer isn't so simple. While the physical caliphate crumbled by 2019, its ideology remains a dark specter haunting Europe and beyond. Experts warn that the actual ISIS propaganda machine has mutated, shifting from territorial conquest to inspiring lone wolves and small cells in foreign lands. Europe's intelligence agencies remain on high alert, as my sources tell me that multiple nations have uncovered dozens of plots in recent years, most of them stopped, but others heartbreakingly successful. So what's the challenge? It's that ISIS's recruitment tactics adapt quickly. Online videos, encrypted messaging apps, and social media platforms become fertile grounds for new followers. Often, these followers, they're isolated Muslim youth searching for identity or purpose. The shadowy caliphate no longer needs physical borders to wage terror, and it doesn't need the official name of ISIS to be in place anymore. And what of those foreign fighters, thousands of Europeans who joined ISIS abroad? Many remain detained or imprisoned, but their fate poses complex dilemmas. How do governments balance security concerns with human rights? Do repatriation efforts risk new attacks? The debate is ongoing and deeply divisive. Europe's biggest challenge moving forward is this: the radicalization of young Muslims in Europe, something that was not and is not just a random occurrence. It was, and still is, the results of decades of socio-economic neglect, cultural exclusion, discrimination, but also liberal immigration laws that allow thousands to flow into European countries, many void of any real background screening. ISIS did not create these feelings of alienation, not at all. However, they did effectively capitalize on them, offering a dangerous escape for those who felt they had nowhere else to turn. Make no mistake, the terrorist attacks that followed, including the Paris attacks of 2015, were the tragic consequences of this exploitation. As long as the underlying issues of exclusion and inequality remain, the threat of radicalization will continue to lurk in the shadows, waiting to strike again. In our next episode, we take you deep inside the nuclear football, the presidential briefcase that carries the launch codes for nuclear missiles and unimaginable power. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Charles Denyer. This is Threat Level Red.
Threat Level Red is a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. For more information, visit charlesdenyer.com to learn more about current and upcoming podcasts and episodes, current and future book publications, professional services offered by Charles, and much more. All opinions expressed are those of the host and do not reflect the official positions of any government agency, military branch, or national security organization.